Hello and welcome to the second in this series of 7 webinars on the topics of stage construction analysis. So the webinar series breaks down into 2 introductory webinars, which this is the second. Then I'll go into detail in a series of 4 webinars and then finish off with a summary trying to pick up on the key points from the various webinars up to that point. So in this webinar, we're dealing with the simple workflow as we've implemented it within Tekla Structural Designer. So setting up stage construction analysis can be quite a complex process as it's done within some pieces of software. In TSD, we just tried to keep this procedure as simple as we could, and we think we achieved that. The steps involved are summarized below. So we've got, you create and load a model as you would normally do. There's no change. As you do that, we automatically create a series of construction stages, and you'll need to review those. You'll need to add a construction stage load combination or stage construction load combination. So this is a combination that describes the amount of load that will apply during each of those construction stages. We've got in here something about reviewing concrete modification factors. That's more for awareness than anything, but again, we'll go into that in detail in one of the later webinars. Then you need to enable the stage construction analysis to indicate that you want it to be used for design. And then you just run the overall analysis and design process in the same way as you always did. And TSD will run all the necessary analyses and then run the design considering the results of stage construction analysis. In the help system, there is a worked example that you can access. Just showing it over here. The model can be downloaded and you can work through all the steps. And I'm going to use that same model to show you the workflow at its simplest. So we'll do that now in a live video presentation. Here is the simple example model, an 8-story structure with 8 identical floors and some loading applied. So we've got gravity load cases, self-weight, an additional dead load allowance, some services allowance, imposed loads, and then wind loads, and only 5 combinations, 1 gravity combination and 4 with wind loads. So this would be ready for analysis and design as we would have done it in a previous version of the software. So now, to start to think about stage construction analysis, I can swap to the review view, and I'm going to look at the show alter state view, where one of the options is to review staged construction. So it's down here in this list, and it initially opens up showing you all of the stages. So these stages are created automatically based on floor levels at the moment. Now, in a separate, more detailed webinar, we can look at how we're going to edit all of that. But for this simple example, I'm going to accept it. Obviously, I can do things like change the stage duration for all the stages. I can go and change them each individually. I can do all sorts of things, but we'll cover all that later. So I'm going to accept these stages. One quite nice feature in here is, and especially if you're going to do more sophisticated things with the staging, is to animate it. So you can see the stages, working through the stages. And if I put this over there, you can also pause this, step back and forth through it. So I can see the stages in this different way and start to again review and change what's in the stages, change the timing of the stages. So now I'm going to accept that those are the stage content. Now we have to deal with the stage by stage loading. And to do that, we create a new combination. So there's a new combination and there is a new class of combination for defining the construction stage loading. So if I go and edit this combination, I usually give it a title like CSL, construction stage loading. And over here in the background, you can see that I've got at stage 5, this is stage 5, there's the most recent content, and then there is the older content. So the structure that was introduced in stage 5 and the structure that was in the preceding stages. And so when it comes to loading, we work with all the loads you've normally defined and introduce those onto the various stage models. And We're doing that, so we have this concept of recent stages and older stages. And then with the recent stages set to the default of 1, the model over here is showing the newest structure, that's the recent stages, and all of these would be older stages. I can change that if I want, but again, I'm going to accept the default that the recent stage is just that latest floor level. I can introduce a loading onto those floors. So on the most recent stage, the bit that's just introduced, I'll say it's nothing, and I'll say I'm going to put 0.75 kilonewtons on the older stages. I don't need to do it that way. I could actually use the impose load that I've defined, but I'm going to add in dead and services load. So the self weights, you can see I've got a factor of 1. So all of the defined self weight in the recent stages and the older stages. The dead load, so this is the finishes loading. I'll say that on the recent stages it's nothing, and on the older stages I'm going to say 0.75, because I'm thinking that maybe it's more of an allowance rather than actually what the load will be. And in a similar vein, the services, I've got recent stages nothing, and I'll put in 0.75 on the older stages. So it's up to you what you describe for the loading here, but this is a very simple way of using the loads that you would have defined for the main construction, and using proportions of that to define the load in each stage. So that's the construction stage loading applied. Now, during in our summaries about this, we're sort of making a big point about going and looking at the analysis modification factors. And we do say you should review them. It doesn't mean you have to change them. You may want to change them, but having changed them to be what you want them to be, you might never want to change them again. But for all analysis, there are analysis modification factors that adjust the stiffness. With the focus here on concrete, for building analysis, the stiffness adjustments are reducing the stiffness quite a lot, and that's really targeted at second order analysis for at ultimate limit state, and it's not necessarily appropriate for serviceability limit state, for wind loading and so on. So when it comes to stage construction analysis, we've got factors for the construction stages, and then we've got factors for the design stages, and we have persistent loading at strength and persistent loading service, transient loading strength, transient loading service. So the gravity combination that I described at ultimate limit state we'll use these factors, and at serviceability limit state we'll use some different factors. The transient loading, so the combinations with the wind loading, use these two sets of factors. So the factors are all changed slightly, and again in a separate webinar I'm going to talk through where the defaults have come from, but again it's up to you. You may want to accept those defaults, you may want to put in some of your own. But actually this is also this ability to see results for a gravity combination with one set of factors and a wind combination with a different set of factors, so long-term load versus more instantaneous load, is a feature in its own right that people have asked for when they're not really asking for stage construction. So again, accepting all the defaults. I'll swap back to the structure view here. Then for design, for the design settings, the new part introduced for stage construction analysis is quite simply the option to include it. So when I include stage construction analysis, the text here tells me here, indicate which other results you want to continue to be considered. So as I've talked about already, there has always been a concept of an envelope of results that are considered in design. So 3D building analysis was at one end of the envelope and the chase downs are at the other. When we include stage construction analysis, the default situation is that we stop thinking about 3D building analysis, but we still include the chase downs. Again, you've got options here, and again, I'm going to talk about this in more detail in the later webinars. So now, for now, I have activated consideration of stage construction analysis, and I'm now ready to run the design. So when I run design all static, open up the process window here. So it's doing pretty much the same as it always did. So it does a 3D analysis without stage construction analysis, then it's doing stage construction analysis, then it's doing the chase downs, then it's running into design of all the members, considering all of that, all of those results. So that's it. That's basically it done. That is the workflow at its simplest, the steps, the things you need to consider. So we've designed that structure. I will just go one step further here with this little model. So I've designed that structure for stage construction analysis results at one end of that sort of envelope concept, chase downs at the other. Everything's passing. If I now go to auto check design, I'll switch everything into being a check mode only. In the design settings, I'm now going to exclude the stage construction analysis. So I'm back to considering just building analysis at one end and the chase downs at the other. And if I run the design of that structure, we can see what happens. So how different the results might be. We have now designed for the tighter envelope, and we're going back to now checking that when it gets designed for the slightly wider envelope. So for this simple model, only two things fail. So basically that's two places where the reinforcement that you needed in these columns for a traditional 3D analysis is greater than the amount that you would need when you start to consider stage construction analysis. So this is a sort of first view on this potentially slightly more efficient design that you can get by considering stage construction analysis in combination with the chase downs. Okay, so just to summarize things once again, we've created a very simple workflow. You create and load the model as you would have always done. Then you can review the automatically created construction stages. Create a stage construction load combination where you describe the load that will apply during the construction phases. Review those concrete modification factors. Enable stage construction analysis to be considered during the design of the members in the structure. And then run overall analysis and design again, as you always would have done. And then review your results and output again, as you would always have done. So that brings us to an end of the second webinar in this series. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed it.